rain on Mack Avenue, and Vernita Holloway stepped off the curb with her arm held straight out and a 6-year-old's hand tucked inside her glove, the way she had every school morning for 11 winters. $11.40 an hour. 0 accidents. 1 corner she had asked for by name, and not one sick day taken against it. She did not know that the report sitting on Marshall Whitfield's desk that same morning, used those 11 clean years to prove the corner had never needed a guard at all. 4 hours later, he would be the one standing in her place, in the same gray rain, in a suit that cost more than she made in a month. He was not ready for what the empty corner would tell him before she said a single word. The corner was Mack and Coleman on the east side of Detroit, where the avenue came down off a long flat stretch, and cars came faster than the posted 25 because nothing about that block told a driver to slow down. There was a school there, Coleman Elementary, 312 children, walking in from 6 surrounding streets, and there was a light that had been broken so many times the city had stopped sending a truck. There was Vernita. She got to the corner at 6:40 every morning, which was 20 minutes before she was required, because the first child usually came at 6:55, and she did not like a child to arrive and find the corner empty. She wore a yellow vest faded almost to the color of butter and a hood pulled over a satin bonnet. She kept on under everything to protect a press that cost her $14 at Miss Carroll's every other Saturday. She carried a sign on a wooden pole, "Stop on both faces," the red gone pink at the edges from 11 years of weather. She did not carry an umbrella. You could not hold a sign and a child's hand and an umbrella all at once, and of the 3, the umbrella was the one a person could do without. People who drove past her every morning would have told you if you asked that they did not really see her. That is the truth of a crossing guard. She is furniture that moves. She is the thing that means the light is out again. This best vest the way you see a traffic cone, vest, and they slowed for the vest and not for the woman inside. And that was fine with Vernita, because the slowing was the whole point and the seeing was not. She knew the children by their walks before she knew them by their faces. She knew the DeWitt boys came and the older one always let go of the younger one's hand at the exact halfway line of the crosswalk. Every single day, like crossing the yellow paint made him a man. She knew Keisha Pruitt's grandmother walked her as far as the corner of Coleman and then turned back, and that the grandmother's knees were going, and that one of these mornings the grandmother would not be able to make the corner anymore, and Vernita had already decided that when that morning came, she would walk Keisha the rest of the way herself and tell no one. She knew that the small girl in the purple coat, the one whose name she had learned was Amara, was afraid of the storm drain at the edge of the crosswalk and would not step over it unless someone held her hand. And so Vernita held her hand over the drain every morning, 8 steps, and let go on the far side, and Amara never knew she was being managed around a fear, only that the lady at the corner was there. This is the work. It does not look like anything. A person stands in the cold and holds out an arm, and most mornings nothing happens, and the nothing that happens is the entire job, and there is no way to count it. You cannot put on a page the number of children who were not hit. You can only put the number who were, and at Mack and Coleman that number for 11 winters was 0. There was a morning, 4 years back, that no record anywhere held. A delivery van had run the broken light at 6:59, doing close to 40, and a boy named Terrence, 7 years old, late and running, had been a half step from the curb's edge, and Vernita had seen the van in the corner of her eye before she had seen the boy, the way you learn to see a whole intersection at once after enough winters in it. And she had not thought. She had moved. She had caught the back of Terrence's hood and pulled, and the van had gone through the space where the boy's body would have been, and the wind of it had moved her vest, and Terrence had said ow because she had near choked him with his own zipper. And then he had run on across once the van was gone, irritated with her, not understanding. And that was correct. A child should not understand. A child should only be irritated and late and alive. Vernita had stood on the curb for a few seconds, with her heart going, and then she had turned back to the road because there were more children coming. And she had told no one, and it had gone into no file, and Terence was 12 now and did not remember it. And that was the work. The work was the thing that left no mark on purpose, and a thing that leaves no mark is a thing the world has decided it does not have to pay for. Vernita had come up from Alabama, from a town outside Selma. Her people had left when she was 9, in a car with a mattress tied to the roof and her grandmother's Bible on her lap because nobody trusted it to the trunk. They had come north the way half the block had come north, chasing a cousin's letter and a plant job that turned out to be real for about 4 years, and then was not. She remembered the crossing of the Ohio River at night and her grandmother saying, "Lo." So the children would not catch the weight of it. That they had crossed over now, and there was no going back to crossing under. Vernita had not understood it then. She understood it now, standing at a crossing for a living, the way you come to understand the things the old people said only after they are gone and cannot be asked. She had buried 2 people who mattered, and one who mattered more than the word bury can hold, and she did not talk about the third, and the not talking was a discipline she had built the way you build a wall, 1 quiet brick a day. In her coat pocket, the left one deep sewn shut at the bottom corner so nothing could ever work its way out, she carried a child's glove. Red, knit, single. The match to it was gone 30 years and was not coming back. She did not take it out. She did not need to take it out. She only needed to know, with her hand in the dark of the pocket, that it was there. Some mornings she touched it before the first child came. Most mornings she did not have to. After the corner she walked 4 blocks to Miss Dovey's, the corner store that had been Dovey's mother's store and her mother's before that, and she bought the same thing she bought most days, a coffee and a roll, and Dovey, who was 81 and ran the register on a stool because her hip would not let her stand, would say the same thing she said most days. "You out there in that," Dovey would say, looking past Vernita through the door glass at the rain coming sideways. 11 years standin' in the weather for them babies. They ought to build you a little house out there. A little house with a heater in it. "They're not going to build me a house, Miss Dovey. Naw. They surely ain't." And Dovey would push the roll across the counter and wave off the dollar every 3rd or 4th day, the way old women on that block had been waving off dollars to each other since before either of them was born. A whole economy that ran underneath the real one and kept people alive in the gaps the real one left. On Sundays, Vernita, ushered at Greater Mount Moriah, 3rd pew from the back on the left, and she wore white gloves to do it. And she handed out programs and walked the late ones to seats and stood at the door during the offering with her hands folded, and the work was the same work she had come to see, standing at a door so people could pass through it safely, watching so that no one came to harm in the passing. She hummed in church. She did not sing out. She hummed low under the choir, and the hymn she hummed most was the slow one about being brought from a mighty long way, and she did not always know she was humming it until Sister Pruitt, Keisha's grandmother, who sat beside her, would put a hand on her arm. Not to stop her, just to say, "I hear you." On Saturdays the girl came early and stayed late, and the day was built around the hair. Vernita would set a chair in the kitchen by the window where the light was good, and put a towel around her own shoulders and let Nia stand behind her with the jar of grease and the rat-tail comb and a bowl of barrettes. And the girl would part and grease and pull, narrating the whole time, school and a boy named Devon, who was not worth the breath, and a teacher who was, and Vernita would say, and that right there, and not too tight now, baby." Though she let it be too tight, and on the stove there would be something going. Greens with the smoked turkey neck in them, or a pan of cornbread she would not cut until the parts were even, because Nia liked to eat it warm with her fingers still smelling of grease, and would not wait if it was out early. Once, with her hands deep in the back of Vernita's head, the girl had gone quiet and then asked, "Grandma, who taught you?" and Vernita had said, "My mother and her mother before her," and Nia had said, "No, who taught you to stand out there in the cold like that? Who taught you to do that?" And Vernita had been still for a moment with the smoked turkey going on the stove and the comb resting against her scalp, and then she had said, "Nobody taught me that one. I had to learn it the hard way," and she had not said more, and Nia, who was 11 and sharp, had not asked, and had only pulled the next part a little gentler, which was its own kind of knowing. That was the size of Vernita Holloway's life, and she did not experience it as small. She experienced it as exactly the right size for what she had to carry. The corner, the store, the pew, the pocket. A granddaughter, Nia, 11 years old, who lived across town with Vernita's daughter and came on Saturdays and was learning to braid, and was not very good at it yet and pulled too tight. Hermeta let her, and came to church Sunday with her scalp aching, and did not say a word, because the ache was Nia's hands in her hair, and there was no version of the world where Vernita would give that up. She was 59 years old. She intended to stand at that corner until they made her stop, and she did not believe anyone would ever bother to make her stop, because to make someone stop you first have to see that they are there, and nobody saw her, and she had made her peace with that a long time ago. She was wrong about being unseen. She did not know it yet, but she was about to be seen, and the seeing would come at her from the one direction she had never thought to watch. Marshall Whitfield saw the corner as a line item. He was 50 years old, and he had built a company called Whitfield Facilities Group out of a single contract to clean a strip mall in 1998. And now the company maintained, cleaned, secured, and in some cases had built outright more than 200 buildings across 3 counties. And 4 of those buildings were schools. And the building of schools was how Marshall had gotten himself onto the Regional Education Board in the first place. He told people he had run for the board to give back. This was true, and it was also not the whole truth. The way the things successful men say about themselves are usually true, and also is not the whole truth. He had come up not 2 miles from Mack and Coleman, on Helen Street, in a house his mother rented for $41 a week, and kept so clean you could have done surgery on the kitchen floor. Geneva Whitfield had cleaned other people's houses in Grosse Pointe in the day, and an office tower downtown at night, and she had walked Marshall to school every morning that her schedule allowed and arranged for a neighbor to do it when it did not. Because Geneva had a rule, the same rule Vernita had, though the 2 women never met. No child of hers crossed a street alone. Marshall had forgotten this. He had forgotten it so completely that it was not even a thing he decided to forget. It had simply fallen out of him somewhere on the climb, the way the bottom rungs of a ladder are the ones you stop thinking about once you are high enough. And there was a thing under that, further down, that he had forgotten so long it was not even a memory anymore. Only a shape a memory leaves. On the mornings Geneva could not walk him, and the neighbor could not either. He had crossed Warren Avenue alone to get to school, except he had never actually crossed it alone, because there had been a woman on that corner too, a heavy woman in a coat with a thermos, who had known his name and called it out and held the cars and said, "Go on now, baby," and box him with her arm if he ran, and put her gloved hand flat on his chest at the curb the one time he came down off it too soon. He had been 6. He could not have told you her name then and could not now. She was just the corner. She was the thing that meant it was safe to go, and a 6-year-old does not thank the thing that means it is safe to go any more than he thanks the floor for being under him. Marshall had grown up and gotten rich, and joined a board and built a plan, and the woman on Warren Avenue had dissolved into the general background of a childhood he was too busy escaping to keep. And he did not know, sitting in his office with the spreadsheet glowing green, that he had once been a row in someone's column of zeros, that he was alive in part because a woman the world did not see had stood in the weather for $11 an hour and held out her arm. He would know it, soon. The knowing was 41 days and 1 basement away. Geneva had died 14 months before this story begins. She had died in a room, Marshall paid for, in a facility his own company serviced, and he had stood at the foot of her bed in a $400 coat and felt nothing he could name. And the nothing had frightened him more than grief would have. In the 14 months since, Marshall had done what men like Marshall do when a feeling they cannot name comes for them. He had worked. He had measured. He had reduced large, warm, complicated things to numbers, because numbers could be controlled and a mother's face at the foot of a bed could not. There was one thing Geneva had said near the end, that Marshall could not put down and could not pick up either. She had been mostly gone by then, drifting, calling him by the names of men dead longer than he had been alive. And then one afternoon she had surfaced all the way, clear-eyed, and looked at him in his good coat with his phone in his hand and said, "Marshall, you got so big I can't find you in there." And he had said something, he did not remember what, something about how he was right there, Mama, and she had shaken her head, slow, patient, the way she used to when he was a boy, lying about his homework, and she had said, "No, baby, you got big the wrong way. You was supposed to get big like a tree. You went and got big like a building." And then she had drifted off again and never came back that clear. And she had died 11 days later, and Marshall had stood at the foot of the bed and felt the nothing. And he had decided the nothing meant he was strong, when in fact the nothing was just a building's worth of distance between a man and the last true thing his mother ever said to him. He carried the sentence around like a stone in a shoe. You got big like a building. He did not understand it. He would understand it on a basement floor, 14 months later, all at once, the way you understand a thing only after it is too late to tell the person you finally heard them. The consolidation plan was Marshall's. He believed in it, and his belief was not stupid. The district was losing children every year, families moving out, buildings running at half capacity, heating bills on rooms that held 9 students. Coleman Elementary was at 58% of the enrollment it had been built for. The plan would close 3 small schools and move their children to 2 larger ones, and Marshall had run the numbers more carefully than anyone on the board. And the numbers said the plan would save the district roughly $1,800,000 a year, and that money could put a counselor back in every building and a nurse back in 4 of them. And Marshall was not wrong that those things mattered. Inside the plan, far down, on page 19 of a 51-page document, was a section on what the plan called redundant safety infrastructure. When children were consolidated into fewer buildings on fewer routes, some crossings would no longer carry foot traffic, and some crossing guard positions could be eliminated. The district employed 31 crossing guards. The plan identified 9 positions as candidates for elimination. The way the plan identified them was simple, and it was the kind of simple that sounds like rigor. It ranked the corners by incident rate. Corners with high accident counts kept their guards. Corners with low counts were flagged. Corners with 0 incidents over the measured period were flagged first. Mack and Coleman had 0 incidents over the measured period, 11 years. It sat at the very top of the elimination list, the safest corner in the district, and in the logic of the plan, the safest corner was the one that most clearly did not need protecting. Marshall had not put Vernita's name in the plan. He did not know her name. He knew the corner as a code, EC7, East Corridor 7, and he knew it as a row in a spreadsheet, and the row was green, and green meant cut. He was a man who had been hurt by a thing he could not name, and had responded by trusting only things he could. And the plan was the most nameable thing he had built in 14 months, and he loved it the way you love, the thing that lets you not feel something worse. The vote was scheduled for the 3rd week of the following month, 41 days out. The thing that started it was small, the way these things are small. Marshall liked to walk his projects. It was a habit from the early years when the company was him and a mop and a Ford with 190,000 miles on it, and he had never lost the belief that a man should put his own eyes on a thing before he signed his name under it. So on a Tuesday in the rain, 11 days before the public hearing on the plan, He drove out to the east corridor to look at the corners on his elimination list, because a board member opposed to him, a retired teacher named Cornelius Boyd, had stood up in committee and said, "You cannot cut a guard you have never watched work." And Marshall, who prided himself on never being caught flat, had decided to watch. He parked his car, a German sedan the color of wet slate, half a block up from Mack and Coleman at 6:38 in the morning, and he kept the engine running for the heat, and he watched. He watched a woman in a faded yellow vest at 6 Fork City and stand in rain that was turning to something colder, and he watched her not look at a phone, because she did not appear to have one out, and not pace, and not huddle. She simply stood, facing the avenue, the sign held down at her side, and she watched the road the way Marshall's mother used to watch a pot she did not trust, and he found that he could not look away from her, and he did not know why. At 6:55 the children began to come. He watched her step into the street and hold up the sign and hold out her arm, and he watched cars stop, and he watched her walk a small girl in a purple coat across the crosswalk, holding the girl's hand for a stretch in the middle and letting it go on the far side, and he watched the same thing happen with 2 boys, and then a cluster of 4, and then a grandmother and a child, and over the course of 18 minutes he watched, perhaps, 40 children cross a dangerous road behind a faded vest and a pink sign, and the held-out arm of a woman he was 11 days from cutting, and not one of them so much as stumbled, and the whole thing was so smooth, so practiced, so completely without incident, that Marshall caught himself thinking the exact thought the plan had taught him to think. He thought, "Nothing is even happening here." He thought, "This corner is fine." He thought, "She is barely doing anything." And then a panel truck came down, off the flat stretch too fast, the way the plan's own traffic study said vehicles did at that corner, at a rate the study had logged and then buried in an appendix, and the woman in the vest did a thing Marshall would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. She did not blow a whistle. She did not shout. She took one step forward off the curb, planted the sign, and raised her free hand flat, palm out, at the truck. And she did not flinch, and the truck stopped, and a boy who had been about to come off the curb behind her, a boy she could not even have seen because her back was to him, stopped too because her body had stopped, and her stopping had stopped him. It was over in 3 seconds. The boy crossed. The woman lowered her arm. The truck went on, and Marshall sat in a warm car worth more than the woman would earn in 2 years, and understood that he had just watched the corner work, and that the reason it looked like nothing was happening was that she was so good at her job that the danger never got to become an event, and that an event was the only thing his plan knew how to count. He did not understand all of that in the car. In the car he understood only that something was wrong with the way he had been thinking, and that the wrongness had a shape he could not yet see, and that the woman in the vest was somehow at the center of it. He drove away before she finished her shift. He told himself he had seen enough to make his case at the hearing. He had seen enough to lose it. He could not stop thinking about her after that, and it irritated him, because Marshall did not like to carry a thing he could not file. He went back twice more that week, though he told his assistant he was visiting the warehouse, and both times he parked half a block up and watched, and both times the corner ran like a clock, and the woman in the vest did the thing where she made the danger disappear before it could happen. And the third time he saw something he had missed. He saw that before the first child came, in the few empty minutes when she was alone on the corner, she put her left hand into her coat pocket and held it there. And her face, which the rest of the time was a working woman's face, set and patient and turned toward the road, became for a moment a different face. He was too far away to read it. He only knew it was a face a person makes when no one is watching, and that he had no business seeing it, and that he could not stop looking. He found out her name by accident. He had pulled the personnel file on EC7 to confirm the position's salary for the cost projection, fully intending the file to be a number, and the number was there, $11.40 an hour. no benefits, seasonal layoff in summer, and above the number of them was a name, Holloway, Vernita L. And a hire date, and the hire date stopped him because it was 11 years and 2 months back, and beside it, in the original handwritten application the district had scanned in 2014 along with everything else, was a line he was not supposed to read anyway. The application had a field that said Preder Andred Assignment, and most applicants left it blank. Because crossing guards do not get to pick their corners, they get sent where the district needs a body. Vernita Holloway had not left it blank. In careful, slanted handwriting she had written, Mack and Coleman if available. And under it, in the field that said reason for preference, which was meant for things like close to home and on my bus line, she had written 4 words that Marshall read once, and then sat back from his desk and read again. Personal. Will explain if needed. No one had ever needed her to explain. She had been given the corner because the corner was open, and she had asked, and no one cared enough to ask why a woman would request, by name, the single most dangerous crossing in the East Corridor, the one with the broken light, and the flat stretch and the trucks. They had stamped her application and sent her to the corner and forgotten her, and she had stood there for 11 winters holding the line, and now Marshall Whitfield sat in his office at 9 at night with the lights off in the outer rooms and the rain on the window and 4 handwritten words on his screen, and he felt the shape of the wrongness move a little closer to the surface. He pulled the incident records next. He told himself he was being thorough. He wanted to confirm the 0, to put it in the hearing packet, the clean 11-year 0 that proved the corner was safe. The record system went back to 2009. He searched the corner. He got his 0. Every year, a column of zeros as clean as the plan promised, and he was about to close the file when he noticed that the records only went back to 2009 because that was when the system was digitized, and that there was a note at the bottom of the screen, a small gray note he had scrolled past a dozen times that said pre-2009 in spent records. Paper archive, basement, building C was his company maintained it. He had keys. He should have gone home. He had a 0. The 0 was all the plan needed and more than the hearing required. But Marshall Whitfield had built everything he owned on a refusal to stop reading a thing before he reached the bottom of it, and the bottom of this thing was in a basement 2 miles from where he had learned to walk, and a woman he had watched stop a truck with her open hand had written 4 words on an application 12 years ago, and promised to explain if anyone needed her to, and Marshall found that he needed her to, and that there was no one to ask but a box of paper in the dark. He got his coat. He drove out to Building C at 10 at night in the rain, and he let himself in with his own keys, and he went down to the basement where the air was cold and smelled of paper and old water. And he found the archive boxes, and he started looking for the corner of Mack and Coleman before 2009, before the 0, before Vernita, in the years no spreadsheet had ever counted. It took him an hour. The boxes were not in order. His knees hurt from crouching, and his $400 coat had a gray smear of basement dust across the shoulder. And he had stopped, somewhere in the second box, thinking of his mother, who had cleaned rooms like this one, who would have known exactly how to find a thing in a room nobody had bothered to keep. And then, in the third box, in a folder marked 2007-2008, East Corridor, Incidents, he found a single sheet, a carbon, the kind of form they did not even make anymore, and at the top of it, typed on a machine, were the words he had come down into the dark to find and had hoped, without knowing he hoped it, not to. Crossing Incident Report. Mack Avenue at Coleman Street. He read the date. He read the time, 7:52 a.m. He read the line that said guard on duty, and the line was blank, and beside the blank someone had written by hand, in the same kind of careful slanted hand he had seen once already that night. No guard assigned to this crossing. And then he read the next line. And Marshall Whitfield, who had felt nothing he could name standing at the foot of his mother's bed 14 months before, sat down on the cold floor of the basement of a building he owned, with the rain coming down on the city above him, and felt, finally, all of it at once. The line he read was the line that named the child. It is not necessary to set down here what the report said happened. It is enough to say that on a morning in the fall of 2007, at a corner with a broken light and no guard, a 6-year-old boy named Isaiah was lost on his way to school, and that the form recorded it in the flat language form's use, and that at the bottom, in the box for next of kin notified, a name was typed that Marshall had been reading off a personnel file and an application all night. Holloway, the boy's mother, was Vernita Holloway, who was not yet a crossing guard, who was a presser at a laundry on Gratio in the fall of 2007, who walked her son to the edge of his street every morning and watched him from there, because that was as far as her shift would let her go before she had to run for her own bus, and who had stood at that edge and watched. The morning it happened, from a block away, unable to cross the distance in time, and who had decided in the years that followed, in a grief that had no bottom, that she would learn to be the thing that had not been there, that she would become the held-out arm, that she would stand at a corner like the one that took her son, and she would make it so that no mother had to watch from a block away. And she would do it for $11.40 an hour, and never tell anyone why, because there are some prices you do not put on a thing, and the why of it was hers, and not the district's, and not the spreadsheets, and not anyone's. Mack and Coleman if available. Personal. Will explain if needed. She had not asked for the safest corner. She had asked for the one that had taken her child, and then she had made it the safest corner in the district with her own body. 11 winters of it. And the 0 that Marshall had been about to use to prove she was unnecessary was not the absence of danger. It was the presence of her. The 0 was the most expensive thing in the entire 51-page plan, and it was the one thing the plan had read as worth nothing, because the plan, like Marshall, could only count the children who were hurt, and had no column anywhere for the children who were not. And the not was the whole of Vernita Holloway's life. Marshall sat on the floor for a long time. When he stood up, his knees would not straighten right away, and he thought, absurdly, of how his mother used to come up off a kitchen floor she had been scrubbing, one hand on the counter, never complaining, and he had walked past her doing it 10,000 times, and never once helped her up. And she was gone now and could not be helped up, and the woman at the corner could be. The woman at the corner could still be helped up. It was the first clean feeling he had had in 14 months, and it did not feel good. It felt like a bone being set. But he recognized it, the way you recognize your own name called across a room, as the thing he had stopped being able to feel. He took the carbon. He should not have. It was a record, but he took it, and he drove home, and he did not sleep. And in the morning he did the only thing he knew how to do with a thing once he understood it. He went to work on it. He did not go to Vernita. That was the thing the people who later told this story always got wrong, the part they reshaped into something cleaner. They said the rich man went and found the poor woman and told her he had seen the light. He did not. Marshall understood, in a way he could not have understood before that night, that a man does not get to walk into a woman's grief and use it to feel redeemed, that her son's was not a lesson arranged for the benefit of his soul, that the worst thing he could do was make her corner about him. So he did not go to the corner to be seen seeing her. He went to work in the place where he actually had power, which was not the corner. It was the room with the vote in it. He pulled the plan apart. He kept the part that was right, the consolidation, the savings, the counselors and the nurses, because that part was still true, and a child needs a nurse as much as a child needs a corner. But he took out page 19, the redundant safety infrastructure, all 9 positions, and he rebuilt the section from the floor up, and the thing he built was not a list of corners to cut. It was a method for reading a corner that could see the thing his old method could not. He wrote, in language a board could vote on, That a crossing with 0 incidents under an assigned guard must be evaluated as a guarded crossing performing its function, not as an unguarded crossing lacking risk, and that to remove the guard and then watch whether incidents rose was to run an experiment on children, and that the district would not run experiments on children. He had it costed. Keeping the 9 positions cost the plan $94,000 a year against a saving of $1,800,000. And he wrote that line into the plan himself, the 94,000, and he did not flag it green. And then he did the second thing, the thing that was harder than the report. Because the report was numbers, and Marshall was good at numbers. And the things you are good at are not where a man is tested. He drove out to the East Corridor on a Tuesday morning, the same as the first morning. 41 days after the report had first crossed his desk, 11 days before the now amended plan would come to a vote. But this time he did not park half a block up. And this time it was not to watch. It was 19 degrees, and the rain had finally given over to the thing it had been threatening all month, a hard wet snow that came at the corner, sideways. Vernita got there at 6:40 as she always did, and she was alone for the few minutes before the children, and she put her left hand in her pocket and held the glove the way she did. And she did not see the man come up the avenue on foot in a long dark coat with snow on his shoulders until he was nearly to the corner. She tensed, the way a woman alone on a dark corner does, and then she saw it was a man in an expensive coat, which on that block at that hour made no sense, and she did not relax so much as recalculate. He stopped a respectful distance off, the way you stop near a dog you do not know. "Mrs. Holloway," he said. She had not heard her own name spoken by a stranger in a long time. "Do I know you?" "No, ma'am. My name is Marshall Whitfield. I sit on the education board." She saw her own face close because everyone on that block knew what the board was doing. The closings had been in the paper, and he held up a hand, the same flat open-palmed gesture he had watched her use to stop a truck, though he did not know he was doing it. "I'm not here about the closings, or I am, but not the way you think." He stopped. He had rehearsed this in the car, and the rehearsal was gone. "I came to watch you work 11 days ago. I was going to cut this corner. Your corner was at the top of the list to cut." "Because nothing ever happens, Repriest." "Nothing ever happens here," she repeated, and there was no heat in it, only a great tiredness, because she had spent 11 years, knowing that the nothing was the work, and knowing that no one would ever know it was the work. And here was a man in a $400 coat come to tell her. The nothing had finally been used against her, and she was too cold and too old to be surprised. "I read the file," Marshall said. "I read your application." The first child was coming up Coleman now, far off, a small shape in a hood. Marshall lowered his voice, though there was no one to hear. "I went down to the basement of Building C. I found the report. From 2007. Vernita Holloway went very still. The snow came down between them. Up the block the small shape grew into a child, and Vernita's body, on its own, without her, turned a quarter toward the road, because a child was coming, and a child coming was the one thing in the world that could move her, and Marshall saw the turn and understood it, and understood that he had a few seconds, maybe, before the work claimed her and the moment was gone. "I'm not going to say I understand," he said, fast, low. "I don't. I had a mother who walked me to school, 2 miles from here, and I forgot her name for it. I forgot it. I built a whole life on top of forgetting it. I'm not going to stand here and tell a mother I understand, but I read his name, Isaiah. And I'm not cutting your corner, and I'm not cutting the other 8 either. And I came out here in person because you have stood on this corner for 11 years, and nobody has ever told you that what you do is the most important thing that happens on this street, so I'm telling you. It is the most important thing that happens on this street. I'm sorry it took the basement." The child reached the far curb, Amara in the purple coat, eyes already finding the storm drain, already afraid. Vernita looked at Marshall Whitfield for one more second, and what crossed her face was not what he expected. It was not gratitude and it was not grief. It was something closer to the look you give a person who has finally, after a long time, said a true thing out loud in a room where everyone else has agreed to pretend it isn't there. And then she said the only thing there was time to say. "Then stand here a minute," she said, "and watch the drain." She's scared of the drain. Hold her hand over it, 8 steps, and let go on the other side. Don't make a thing of it. And she stepped off the curb and raised her sign and held out her arm and stopped the avenue, and Marshall Whitfield, 50 years old, in a coat that cost $400, walked out into the snow and took the small cold hand of a girl named Amara and held it over a storm drain for 8 steps and let it go on the far side and did not make a thing of it. And the girl never knew. And that was the point. And for the length of those 8 steps, Marshall understood the entire shape of the wrongness that had been moving toward the surface for 41 days. And it surfaced, and it was not a wrongness about a spreadsheet. It was about every person who had ever helped him up off a floor he never noticed he was being lifted from. The vote was 11 days later. Marshall presented the amended plan himself. He did not tell Vernita's story. He had asked her, through Cornelius Boyd, whether he could, and she had sent back a one-line answer that Boyd delivered with the ghost of a smile. "You can tell them about the corner. You don't need to tell them about me." The hearing was held in the gymnasium of one of the schools that was not closing, on metal folding chairs under a basketball hoop with the net gone. And about 90 people came, which for a school board meeting was a crowd, and most of them came angry because they had read about the closings and not the amendment, and anger is faster than paper. A woman near the front stood up before Marshall had finished his first slide and said her grandmother had walked to Coleman, and her mother had walked to Coleman, and now they were closing Coleman. And where was the man who was going to stand here and tell her that was progress? And Marshall, who a year before would have answered her with the savings figure, the 1,800,000 the counselor in every building, did not reach for the number. He let her finish. He said, "Ma'am, I'm not going to tell you closing your grandmother's school is progress, because it isn't. It's a loss, and the most I can promise you is that we spend the loss on your children and not on a parking lot." And the woman had not been satisfied, because she had not come to be satisfied. She had come to be heard, but she sat down, because he had heard her, and that was different from the number, and the room felt the difference even if it could not have named it. Then Marshall told them about the corner. He set aside the slides. He told them about a crossing on Mac with a broken light and a flat stretch and trucks that came too fast, and he told them what a guard does, which is to turn danger into nothing before it can become an event. And he told them that he himself had drawn up a plan that would have cut 9 of those guards, and that he had been wrong, and that he had been wrong in a particular way that was worth understanding, because the district might be tempted to be wrong the same way again after he was gone. He said, a column of zeros is not the sound of a problem that does not exist. It is the sound of a problem being solved every single morning by a person we have decided is worth $11.40 an hour and not 1 cent of recognition. Cornelius Boyd, the retired teacher, sat in the second row and did not say a word and let the younger man carry it, which was its own kind of generosity, the kind where you do not take the thing back that you started, just because it grew big enough to be worth taking credit for. Marshall put the $94,000 on the screen. He said, "This is what it costs to keep 9 people standing in the weather so that 3,000 children can cross to school, and I am asking this board to find it the cheapest line in this entire plan, because it is." The plan passed. The consolidation went forward, the counselors came back, the nurses came back, and the 9 corners kept their guards, and somewhere in the language of the final document, in the section Marshall had rebuilt from the floor, was a sentence that would outlast everyone in the room. A guarded crossing with no incidents is not a crossing without need. It is a crossing with a guard. But the vote was not the end of it, because Marshall Whitfield had learned, in a basement, the difference between fixing a thing and honoring it, and a vote fixes a thing. Word got around the neighborhood the way word does, which is to say it got around faster than the people it was about would have chosen. Somebody at the hearing had a cousin, and the cousin had a barber, and by the end of the week the men at Pinckney's on Mac, where they had been getting cut for 40 years, were saying that the board had tried to take the ladies' corner and a rich man had stood up and stopped it. They did not have it quite right, none of the versions had it quite right, but they had the shape of it, and the shape was that one of theirs had been about to be erased, and had not been, and the men nodded over it, the way men nod over a thing that confirms a hope they had stopped admitting to. Old Mr. Pinckney himself, who had not crossed at Mack and Coleman in 20 years because his church was the other way, started tipping his hat to Vernita when he passed her corner in his car, slow, deliberate, 2 fingers to the brim, and Vernita, who did not know what he had heard or what he thought he knew, tipped her chin back at him and went on watching the road. And never learned that to Mr. Pinckney she had become, overnight and without her consent, a small monument to the proposition that the neighborhood could still win one. She would have hated being a monument. She did not have time to be a monument. There were children coming. But the chin tip cost her nothing, and the old man needed it, and she had spent her whole life giving people things that cost her nothing and meant everything. So she gave him that too. Every morning, without ever knowing, she was giving it. The honoring came in the spring, and it did not come the way these things usually come, with a plaque and a luncheon and a check, though Marshall had wanted at first to do exactly that, and Cornelius Boyd had talked him out of it. A plaque, Boyd said, is a thing you give a person so you can stop thinking about them. Vernita does not need you to stop thinking about her. She needs you to build the thing that means the next one won't have to wait 12 years for somebody to come down to the basement. So, Marshall built it. He used his own company and his own money, not the district's, and he did not put his name on it. He had tried first to do a smaller and more selfish thing. He had spent an evening trying to find the name of the woman from Warren Avenue. The one with the thermos, the one whose hand he could still feel flat on his chest at the curb if he let himself. And he had gotten nowhere because she had worked a corner in the years before the records were digitized too. And her paper would be in a basement like the other one, in a box nobody had opened, under a column of zeros she had earned with her body and never been paid for. And Marshall had sat with that for a while, the plain arithmetic of it. That the city was built on the unpaid labor of women standing in weather, that he himself was. That you could not even count how many of him there were, because the whole point of the work was to leave no mark. And he had understood then that finding one name was not the thing. The thing was to make it so that the next child who grew up and got and tried, late, to find the name would find it. Because somebody would have written it down, and paid the woman who carried it, and built her a house with a light in it. He started a program to train and pay crossing guards across the East Corridor at a real wage, $15 an hour, with summer pay, so the layoff stopped, and he built each corner a small shelter, a little house, the kind Miss Dovey had said for 11 years they ought to build, with a roof and 3 walls and a heater that ran on a timer and came on at 6 in the morning. He built one at every guarded corner in the corridor. The program got a name eventually, though Marshall did not choose it. The guards chose it among themselves, and they called it the Holloway Corners. And Vernita pretended to hate that and did not stop them. There were 19 guards in it by the second winter, and one of them was a man named Roosevelt, who had driven a bus for 30 years until his eyes went, and one was a woman named Patrice with 3 jobs who dropped one of them when the corner finally paid enough to be worth keeping. And they were, all of them, people the world had been walking past, and now there was a small warm house with a light in it that said, on a single corner at a time, somebody is watching, it is safe to go. He built one at every guarded corner in the corridor. And the first one he built, before any of the others, before the program even had a name, he built at Mack and Coleman and he had it finished overnight so that on a morning in April, Vernita Holloway came to her corner at 6:40 and found, where there had been nothing for 11 winters but the wind, a small warm house with a light on inside it and the heater already running. She stood in front of it for a long time. She did not go in. Going in was not the point, and she knew it was not the point. The point was that it was there, the way the point of the glove in her pocket had never been to take it out. After a while she put her hand in her left pocket and held what was there, and she looked at the little house with the light on, and Miss Dovey, who had been told to be at her window that morning, and had been at her window since 5:30 in a housecoat refusing to miss it, said later to anyone who would listen, that whole 11 years, and they finally built her the little house. There is one more thing, and it is the thing that matters most, and it happened the following winter, on the worst morning of the year, when the snow came down so hard the schools should have closed and did not, and Vernita Holloway, who was 60 now, woke with a fever she would not name and a chest that rattled and got dressed anyway, because the children would come whether she was well or not, and a child coming was the one thing that could move her. But that morning, when she got to the corner at 6:40, the corner was not empty. Marshall Whitfield was standing in it. He was wearing a yellow vest faded to the color of butter, which was not a coincidence. He had asked the supply office for the oldest one they had. He was holding a sign on a wooden pole, "Stop on both faces, the red gone pink," and he was standing in the snow facing the avenue, watching the road the way you watch a thing you do not trust, and, beside him, in the doorway of the little warm house, with the heater running and a thermos of coffee from Miss Dovey's going cold beside it, he had set out a chair. "Cornelius told me you'd come even sick," Marshall said. "So I came too. You're going to sit the house and tell me when I'm doing it wrong. You're not going to argue with me about it because there are children coming, and we don't make a thing of it in front of the children." And Vernita Holloway, who had not let another soul stand in her place at that corner in 11 winters, who had built a wall, one quiet brick a day at around the reason she stood there, looked at a man in a faded vest holding a pink sign in the snow, and she did the thing she had not done in front of another person in 30 years. She let someone else hold the line. She sat in the chair in the doorway of the little warm house. She watched him do it wrong, and she told him, "Hold the arm higher, plant the sign before you step, watch the drain for the girl in purple, 8 steps, let go on the far side, don't make a thing of it." And he did it, badly at first and then less badly, and the children came, 312 of them, over the course of the morning crossing, behind a board member in a butter vest cuffet, while the woman who had taught the corner everything it knew sat in a warm doorway and watched, and not one of them was hurt, and the morning, like 11 years of mornings before it, counted as nothing, and was everything. Before she went home that day, Vernita did one last thing. She had a granddaughter, Nia, 12 now, better at the braiding, and Vernita had decided something over the winter. The way she decided everything, alone, without telling anyone until it was done. She took out of her left coat pocket the red knit glove she had carried for 30 years, the single one, the match long gone, and she did not give it to Marshall, because it was not his and never would be, and she did not bury it, because she had buried enough. She put it in the little warm house, on a small shelf Marshall had built without quite knowing why he was building it, the way the body knows to leave room for a thing before the heart can say what the thing is. And she left it there, in the house on the corner, with the heater running, where it would be warm, where it would be watched, where it would not be alone in the cold anymore, which was all she had ever wanted for any of them, the living and the lost. She kept the whistle. She gave that in the spring to a young woman from the neighborhood, 22, with a baby and no work, whom Marshall's program hired and paid a real wage, and Vernita trained her for a month at the corner that had taken everything from her and given her a reason to keep standing. And on the young woman's first solo morning, Vernita stood across the street and watched her work, and held her own empty hands at her sides, and did not, for once, have anything in her pocket to hold because she had finally set it down somewhere warm. Her hands were free. A child was crossing safely. And that was the whole of it. That was the entire thing she had been trying to say for 30 years without a single word. You do not get to choose whether the world sees the good you do in the dark. You only get to choose whether you keep doing it. She had kept doing it. And in the end, one man had come down into the dark and seen, and that had turned out to be enough, not because she had ever needed to be seen, but because the seeing had built a warm house on every corner where a child still had to cross. I keep getting stuck on one thing. The thing that saved her corner was a number.
Not her.
A column of zeros in a file. That bothers me. Marshall didn't notice Vernita because she stood in the rain for 11 years. He noticed because a spreadsheet sent him to a basement. I wrote it that way on purpose. I'm not sure I'm glad I did. It feels true, and I wanted it to feel hopeful, and I don't think it's both. So here's what I actually want to know. And I mean it. The people who keep you safe and leave no proof of it. Who is yours, and have you ever told them?